And we're live! Hello everyone, and welcome back. I'm your host as usual, Dungeon Master Vibe. Today, we are going to be talking about another little D&D topic. With that, it'll also be probably a little bit on the shorter side of the stream. I feel like these little informational ones tend to be a little bit just shorter for me, just because of the way my brain and thoughts work. But I really enjoyed the last one we did, so I thought we'd give it another little go. Obviously, I still don't have a schedule up, so my streams are still pretty sporadic as they are, but frankly, so far I feel like that just kind of works for me right now. It's just streaming when I feel like it, when I'm able to. It's just kind of what works. But something that is scheduled is next month, June 26th through the 30th. We are for sure now going to be once again taking part in the VTubers Summer Slam. If you're not familiar, that is a annual event being held by Gamers Outreach as a fundraiser to help raise money to provide go-karts for hospitals across a lot of places, frankly. Last year, they raised over $400,000 towards this cause, which was amazing, and we are looking forward to getting to partake in that again. My streams for that might be a little bit smaller this year round, but I am putting together some nice fun plans for it, so I really look forward to seeing you guys for that. So do please make sure you tune in at the end of June, if not to my stream, any of the other streams taking part in the fundraiser, because it is a fantastic fundraiser that is just a good time for everyone and really supports a great cause. So, getting into today's topic, though, we are going to talk about another thing I feel like it's been coming up more and more lately, just in the DM sphere, or maybe just has kind of started to hit my timeline a little more, which is Session 0. Session 0 is something incredibly important for setting up your D&D campaigns, or campaigns of really any TTRPG in general. Before we kind of get into the written materials that I'll provide on here to kind of help formulate my thoughts, we are once again going to be looking at Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Once again proving itself to be a fantastic D&D ebook, as it actually, within the DM section of it, does provide a little outline of things to look forward to in a Session 0. So if my ramblings do not help you, perhaps these pages can. So we're just going to flip on over to that page, and I will also be, of course, putting in my own 2 cents on the matter as well. So, and I will remember to actually zoom in for you guys this time. I did not do that last time, which is probably not super helpful for everyone watching the video. Session 0. So, before I start actually reading all this, let me just go over my terminology of this. So, Session 0 is essentially a session to be played before the actual start of the campaign. You, the DM, gather up all your players, sit them down, and you guys talk about what game you're going to play. This goes into a lot of facets of what to be expected in the campaign itself, and just kind of what's expected of everybody playing in the campaign. This is going to help everyone figure out if the game you're even playing is something everyone's interested in doing, as well as help set up boundaries, make sure nobody does anything uncomfy. If you like to read things like those RPG horror stories, I feel like so many of them start with "there was no Session 0," which is, for sure, yes, it can be a red flag, but I would also like to say that is not having Session 0 does not always mean you're about to play a game with bad people, obviously. It is just like sometimes people don't think it's necessary, some people don't see it as something they need, and sometimes they're right. Sometimes you don't need it. Sometimes people do just like going in blind, and I feel like that can be fine, especially if it's not like a roleplay heavy game. But even if you're just looking for like party comp from more the mechanical side of things, even then Session 0 can be super helpful so that everybody playing can understand what characters they're looking to build and make sure that everything works out as a whole for it. So, to put it into terms of the writing here, before making characters or playing the game, the DM and players can run a special session, colloquy, wow, I can't say that word, colloquially called Session 0, colloquy, colloquially. Hold on, I'm going hung up on this phone. Colloquially. It sounds so right in my head, but it's not sounding right coming out of my mouth. Colloquially called Session 0, to establish expectations, outline the terms of a social contract, and share house rules. Making and sticking to these rules can help ensure that the game is a fun experience for everyone involved. Often a Session 0 includes building characters together. As the DM, you can help players during the character creation process by advising them to select options that will serve the adventure or campaign that awaits. This is something I do think is really good and important to have, as it can really make sure you don't have anyone show up to the table with a character that just doesn't make sense at all for the setting, and can help them feel like their character is more a part of the actual game world that you're playing in, and can really just kind of help ensure everyone can enjoy the time with the characters they create. Character and party creation. Honestly, if anything, I personally feel like this is one of the most important parts of Session 0, because it does help everyone be kind of on the same page of expectations of what it is. Like, curating your character is one of the most important parts of getting ready for the D&D game. And if, characters are brought into it that, like, the DM is just like, yeah, that doesn't work. Like, that can be very upsetting to a player and can really slow things down, as now they're probably having to backpedal whatever character creation stuff they went through. And so it's good to kind of help and make sure everyone is on the same page when they're making their characters. As it says here, each player has options when it comes to choosing a character race, class, and background. Though you may restrict certain options that are deemed unsuitable for the campaign, if there are multiple players in the group, you should encourage them to choose different classes so that adventuring party has a range of abilities. That right there, extremely important. You want to make sure the party is able to do a lot of things. Don't get me wrong, there are cases where it can be fun to have a party of like all the same things. Like, people like to play around with the all bard party and all paladin party and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you have to recognize that when you make that decision, everyone's doing almost the same thing, and there are roles that they're not able to do. It can be a little bit easier with things like Bard, for example, who just get a ton of proficiency types. But combat-wise, you're going to see a lot of repetition in what's happening in the turn. So you do just want to make sure everyone has a good range of abilities, especially if you want to make sure everyone actually enjoys and feels unique in the game. Continuing the reading here, it's less important that the party include multiple backgrounds, as sometimes it's fun to play an all-soldier party or a troop of adventuring entertainers. That right there was actually a really good note, and possibly even a better option than doing, like, say, an all-bard party, because you could say you're all entertainers, but being an entertainer maybe doesn't necessarily mean that you are a bard. You're making your magic happen through dance and song and writing and whatnot. You can be just a regular musician and perhaps fall in a different class and whatnot, and so on and so forth. Continuing the reading, the backgrounds they choose define who their characters were before becoming adventurers, and also include role-playing hooks in the form of ideals, bonds, and flaws, things you ought to know. For example, if a player chooses the criminal background, one of the options for the character's bond is, I'm trying to pay off an old debt I owe to a generous benefactor. If that's the character's bond, you should work with the player to decide who that generous benefactor is and build relevant storylines into the larger campaign. And I feel like this is something a lot of people tend to ignore, is the background stuff. A lot of people feel like background on 5e isn't that important, but this to me is where I feel like it is important, because you shouldn't really look at it so much as, what proficiency stuff it gives you, though they do give you some. You should look at it as to the hooks it gives your character, because they can kind of help, especially if you're newer to role-playing and you don't quite know what kind of character you want to build. Look at what options the backgrounds do. All the backgrounds list some optional hooks for, all those things, ideals, bonds, and flaws, as well as just some possible adventuring hook options. So you should look over that with your players, especially if they're newer and not so sure what to do for the role-playing side of things. Continuing on, we come to party formation. During Session 0, your role is to let the players build the characters they want and to help them come up with explanations for how the characters came together to form an adventuring party. It can be helpful to assume that the characters know each other and have some sort of history together, however brief that history might be. Here are some questions you can ask the players as create characters to get a sense of the party's relationships. Are any of the characters related to each other? What keeps the characters together as a party? What does each character like most about every other member of the adventuring party? Does the group have a patron? See Chapter 2, Group Patrons, for patron examples. We might look at that later, just see how we do on time. We'll probably be fine on time. This isn't a super long section. And also, this is another thing that's important. I will say that a lot of times when I'm running my games, my mic's peaking a lot, just a minute. I will say a lot of times when I am running my games, that a lot of times I tend to start the adventure like with a party just meeting each other, but give them the option to know each other. For example, in my current campaign I'm running for my friends IRO, everyone at the start of the campaign, none of the characters knew each other except for 2 of them. So everyone else, including those 2, now meeting the other group people, all met in a tavern. Yes, that's very cliche, but quite frankly, I love having them meet in a tavern. It's a classic, and I like it, if I'm to be frank. I like to have them meet in a tavern. I don't see it as a bad thing. Which is another thing, is also just kind of a side note. Don't be afraid of cliches. You can't see it, but I'm doing air quotes. Don't be afraid of cliches in your game. Don't be afraid to take inspiration from other works. Don't let Reddit tell you that you should not don't be afraid of letting the game just play on some classic tropes. That's totally fine. In any case, so 2 of the players are part of the same group. They are Grump and Miklan. So Miklan is essentially this dwarf from a rich family who left his family for a life of adventure. Grump is an old soldier who travels with him as kind of his essentially bodyguard, essentially. And so the 2 already knew each other. They are very close to each other, and so they know more about each other's characters than the rest of the group does. And it just kind of helps pre-establish some relations amongst the group, which is essentially what this section is just talking about. Is just setting up, just having everyone, how much does everyone know each other? Do you want them to know everything about each other? Do you want maybe some people do, some people don't? It's just something to keep in mind while you're making new characters, and letting everyone sit down and make the characters together. It does kind of let them, have that chat with each other to figure that out. Was something that you can't really do if you're just, helping everybody one at a time make their character just one-on-one. Continuing with the reading here. If the players are having trouble coming up with a story for how their characters met, they may choose an option from the party origin table, or let a d6 roll choose it for them. You should spend part of Session 0 helping the players flesh out the details. For example, if the character came together to overcome a common foe, the identity of this enemy needs to be determined. If a funeral gathered the group, the identity of the deceased and each character's relationship to them will need to be fleshed out. There's actually a very good example of this in a more recent, when I say recent, it's been out for a few years now. The new Dragonlance game module that came out with a little bit. Spoiler alert for that. At the beginning of that is actually exactly what the party is doing. The party have all been invited to a funeral of a beloved traveling knight who, as the game specifies, when you are making new characters, all the characters should have had some sort of relation with this guy. A friendly relation, it verbally specifies, or at the very least, maybe a friendly rivalry of sorts. So that's just kind of a good example of that. It's a good way to, even if they don't necessarily know each other, they maybe perhaps all have a common, a common person, be an NPC or otherwise, that they do know and has kind of brought them together. And this table is talking about right there, the party origin table. Some options, a list here for you. The characters grew up in the same place and have known each other for years. The characters have united to overcome a foe. The characters were brought together by a common benefactor who wishes to sponsor their adventures. A funeral brings the characters together. Ugh, sorry. That was like, it started as a yawn, then it turned into a burp. That was weird. A festival brings the characters together. The characters find themselves trapped together. That's actually another fun and common one, and that's actually kind of how Out of the Abyss starts up. And that was actually a pretty fun way to start it, is basically everyone just, we're in the Drow prison, and we had to do the prison break and whatnot. That's another fun start, I feel like. And I feel like that's another good one if you kind of want to have your start where you kind of hit the ground running, is you're in prison. Time to break out, Second, get a drink. And he was. And as usual, I need to not be checking my notifications while I'm streaming. Alright. So here's actually an interesting section here, is running a game for one player. I would actually like to say that I have actually done this. Me and my brother have done this with each other before. I've DM'd some solo games for him. He's DM'd some solo games for me. It's interesting. It's an interesting way to play, and it's definitely not great for maybe kind of super long sessions, but for some little stuff, kind of help workshops and things, it can actually be pretty fun. I feel like this one in particular works really good if you know each other very well. For example, this was me and my brother. We know each other and our play styles very well, so it just kind of works for us. But as it says here, a DM running a game for one player should spend part of session 0 working with that player to come up with the character's backstory. Then let the player decide if they want the character to have a sidekick. See the sidekicks page. We talked about that last time we streamed, so this is actually another instance of why sidekicks are kind of awesome, is it can kind of help facilitate this sort of play style pretty good. You might need to help the player run the sidekick for the first few sessions. You should make sure the player understands the functions and limitations of sidekicks. Sidekicks are stalwart companions who can perform tasks both in and out of combat, including things such as setting up camp and carrying gear. Ideally, a sidekick's abilities should complement those of the main character. For example, a spellcaster makes a good sidekick for a fighter or a rogue. I'm actually not sure what creature this is supposed to be here. Oh, hold on, Mason. During a festival below one of the walking statues of Waterdeep, young friends dream of embarking on adventures together. Oh, beneath one of the walking statues of Waterdeep. Oh, okay, yes, that's what it is. So, social... This is what I give us trying to stream in the morning. Social contract. So this is actually an interesting section, and this one is very much less about characters and more about relation between those at the table, like the actual people sitting there playing the game. It's just something to kind of help set up, boundaries and guidelines to make sure that nobody does anything that's going to make anyone uncomfortable, and ensure that everyone is able to have a fun experience. As it says here, D&D is first and foremost meant to be a fun for all experience. If one or more participants aren't having fun, the game won't last long. And trust me, that is true. I have seen it happen. Session 0 is the perfect time for you and the players to discuss the experience they're hoping for, as well as topics, themes, and behavior they deem inappropriate. Out of this discussion, a social contract begins to form. Obviously, this is a social contract. This isn't like a little, you don't need to come up with an actual physical contract for people to sign and have them do that. Though apparently some people do actually do that. I don't really vibe with that, but some people do it. And again, if it works for you, it works for you, So I have not much more to say about that part. Sometimes social contract takes shape organically, but it's good practice to have a direct conversation during session 0 to establish boundaries and expectations. Typical social contract in a D&D group includes implicit or explicit commitments to the following points. And our bullet points gives us are: you will respect the players by running a game that is fun, fair, and tailored for them. You allow every player to contribute to the ongoing story, give every character moments to shine. when a player is talking, you are listening. This is something that is important. Is yes, you're the DM, you're the narrator, but you have to understand, you're narrating, yes, but their characters isn't really are the main characters, so they need to be engaged in taking part in what's happening. Otherwise, you're not going to have much of a story to continue the game with. So you really want to make sure that they are involved and having a pretty leading role in what's happening. Next point here says, the players will respect you and the effort it takes to create a fun game for everyone. The players will allow you to direct the campaign, arbitrate the rules, and settle arguments. When you're talking, the players are listening. Again, it just works both ways. When the DM is trying to let you know what's happening, you should probably be listening so you know what's happening. I myself run a very large group, which can at times, have people maybe not totally tune in. That's just how it is sometimes. But for the most part, everybody knows each other well enough, in my case, that we're able to, without too much effort, get everyone just redialed in, catch them up on what they missed, and just kind of move on with it, So a lot of that does very much just settle into how well you know each other. And I feel like that kind of level of familiarity really dictates how important a lot of this is. Because if you don't know each other very well, you really want to make sure that you're kind of following along these kind of guidelines here. Otherwise, again, it's going to stop being fun for people and the game's not going to last. Next bullet point here is the players will respect one another, listen to one another, support one another, and do their utmost to preserve the cohesion of the adventuring party. Again, yes, just be good to each other, just be good to each other, and everyone can have fun. Should you or player disrespect each other or violate the social contract in some other way, the group may dismiss that person from the table. Again, yes, that can happen. You can be kicked from your D&D group. It is a game. Nobody has any, contractual obligation to let you stick around or anything. If you're being, an asshole, yeah, you can be kicked. Very reasonably so. So, don't be an asshole, when it comes down to a lot of things like this, I feel like it really comes down to is, just be cool and, nice to each other, it's just kind of, I feel like that's a great rule of thumb, just when you're playing games in general, is be nice to each other. Don't be a card, a lobby of, a card lobby, because, I was there in, crunchy Xbox mic days. It can get rough out there. You don't want that at your table, especially not when, you're physically around these other people. That can be awkward. So, and of course, no offense to COD players. It's a running meme. You know it at this point. Come on. You know what the internet says. Anywho, this social contract covers the basics, but individual groups might require additional agreed upon terms to guarantee a fun play experience for all. And a social contract typically evolves as group members learn more about one another. Now, hard and soft limits. This is really important to that comfort level. This is something you want to make sure you understand, especially as a DM, so that you do not introduce things that are going to make anybody super uncomfortable. And the players also need to do the same. If they try to bring up stuff that's going to make anyone uncomfortable, be it other player or DM, you need to not do it. You need to not do that thing that's going to make everyone super uncomfortable. As it states here, once you and the players have acknowledged the terms of the game's social contract and agreed to uphold them, the conversation can segue into a discussion about soft and hard limits. There are many ways to mediate this discussion, and you might want to do some research to find an approach that might work well for your group. For purposes of this explanation, these terms are described as follows. A soft limit is a threshold that one should think twice about crossing, as it is likely to create genuine anxiety, fear, and discomfort. And the way it phrases that, honestly, I would almost say that might honestly be still, a lot of those might still play into a hard limit, because I do not want to make anyone have actual anxiety, fear, and discomfort. I maybe want them to be a little on edge if they're dealing with like the shady evil guy, and if I can make their characters feel anxious, feel afraid or uncomfortable, then that's good. I do not want the player to legitimately feel that way. Like, if you do that, you're going to have people shut down and become very uncomfortable with the game. You don't want that. It's a game, and it should be fun. And then a hard limit is a threshold that should never be crossed. If it is a hard limit, do not introduce it. Do not bring it in. Like, it's very as simple as that. Every member of the group has soft and hard limits, and it behooves everyone in the group to know what they are. Make sure everyone at the table is comfortable with how this discussion takes place. Players might not want to discuss the limits aloud around the table, especially if they're new to role-playing games or haven't spent a lot of time with certain other members of the group. One way to alleviate such discomfort is to encourage the players to share the limits privately with you and allow you to present them without attribution to the whole group. For example, the players could write the limits on index cards for you to read aloud. However these limits are presented, it would be useful for you or one of the players to compile the limits into one list that can be shared with the whole group. Keep in mind that any discussion about limits should be treated with care. Even sharing a person's limits can be a very painful experience, and this conversation should be handled with respect. This is very important, and also, there's so many great ways I've read about people handling this sort of thing. Some people will actually have like these little different colored cards and stuff at the table, and a player can just kind of, casually, a little subtly kind of push forward one of these cards if a scene is kind of veering towards one of the limits. And, the DM could see that and kind of segue the scene a bit, kind of change it up to help them reach a more comfortable level. Like, there's a lot of great ways to handle this. I feel like this presents probably the simplest way to handle it, and honestly, I feel like it's a case where simple can be very effective, and I think this is a good way to do it, is to just let everyone, maybe just kind of let you know if they're not comfortable sharing, just let you know privately, and then just compile everything into a single list where nobody knows what limits are what, and they just know that these are limits, and they shouldn't, cross them. Common in-game limits include, but are not limited to, themes or scenes of sex, exploitation, racial profiling, slavery, violence toward children and animals, gratuitous swearing, and intra-party romance. That last one is actually an interesting one, and one that can actually vary a lot between groups. Some people like to have, some like romance in their games. Some people find it uncomfortable, and I feel like that right there is always something important to point out. I did have a group one time that unfortunately was a bit of a horror story group that session 1 DM very much pointed out how they were very down for and really encouraged like character romance options, and I was like, oh, and initially that just sounds fine. It's like, okay, yeah, so they're fine with that, no issue there. I don't really plan to do that, so it's fine. What I did not realize is how much they actually meant that they wanted to try to make everybody have a romance partner. Like, they would try to force relationships on people, and it was not. And that was not good for a lot of us. It did make a lot of us uncomfortable. So that is one that maybe initially doesn't sound that bad, but as is the case with all these limits, soft and hard limits, if you do not handle them appropriately or delicately, you can make people uncomfortable, even with something that maybe to you feels totally fine. To continue the reading here, common out-of-game limits include unwanted physical contact, dice sharing, dice throwing, shouting, vulgarity, rules lawyering, distracting use of cell phones, and generally disrespectful behavior. And this is another one that is just kind of like, this is more like table etiquette side of things. I will say, every group I've ever played, we play with our dice in between turns, as long as they're not being, distracting, fine. I feel like most people I play with aren't loud. I don't think anyone actually shouts out a character. They might describe my character as shouting, but they don't really shout out a character, We swear a lot. It's a bad habit of mine. I feel like I swear a lot, especially when I'm like voicing a character. Rules lawyering, that is a delicate line to walk upon, to be frank, for anyone. For the most part, you probably want to leave it to DM, unless they're pretty new, in which case, if they want some help, offer some help, but, don't be overbearing. Don't be overbearing with those little rules and whatnot. Distracting use of cell phones, that's actually a really big one, especially nowadays, because it's like, so much of the resources are actually on people's phones, that's like, sometimes it's just hard to tell. Are they looking up rules for how, like, their ability works? Or are they just, like, texting or playing on their phone? It's hard to tell, and it's like, I've actually chatted with some of my group about it, and I feel like for the most part, everyone's pretty good about it. But, again, it's just, these are discussions you need to have with your characters, with your players, to make sure, everyone's on the same page about things. Next up, the discussion of limits is important because DMs and players can have phobias or triggers that others might not be aware of. Any in-game topics or themes that make a member of the gaming group feel unsafe or uncomfortable should be avoided. If a topic or theme makes one or more players nervous, but they give you consent to include it in-game, incorporating it should be handled with care, and you must be ready to veer away from such topics and themes quickly. Like, if they aren't actually big on a lot of gore and whatnot, then, but, it's a game where you fight things. So, yeah, sure, fight the things, but don't describe, like, a bunch of dismemberment and graphic detail of the blows that are being dealt to each other. Just don't do that, And then if they're afraid of, like, spiders or something, for example, like me, maybe don't be super descriptive with how, like, they move and how they attack and whatnot, Just like, that one is one that can be just like, leave a little bit to imagination. Don't, like, over describe and be super detailed with things, because that's where a lot of that stuff can be start kind of forming pictures in your head that can make someone uncomfortable, Now then, while Session 0 is a perfect place to start this discussion, it might not be the only time limits are addressed. Someone might cross a line and need to be reminded of a limit, or someone might not think to include some of their limits in the initial discussion. Players can also discover new limits as the campaign unfolds. Make a plan to check in with the group to make sure the list of hard limits and soft limits is up to date, and remind everyone to revisit this list often in case it changes. Like, that's another big one, is just like, even if it wasn't discussed at Session 0, that doesn't mean you can't discuss it later. And likewise, if it was discussed at Session 0, that doesn't mean that's the only time it needs to be discussed. Like, you guys might be playing with each other for, like, a long time, and if that is the case, you might need to remind people. You might need to find out some new things about each other, You want to make sure that everything is good. So yeah, you just want to make sure everyone is good. Now then, continuing on. Game customization. This is one that I feel like is kind of bigger on the DM side of things, but, you might want to make sure that your player is down for any additional rules and house ruling and whatnot, which is really what this section is all about. Some of them are pretty simple, some of them are kind of bigger. You just want to make sure that, everything is kind of set up nice for everyone. The first section here is more about actually what to include in the game itself. For example, I do like to do a lot of story-heavy stuff, but my group's pretty half and half. Like, about half of them just really prefer combat and aren't super involved in RP scenes, whereas some of the other people are very involved in the RP and really like to do that. And so I make sure to try to provide enough of each for everyone, So, in addition to shaping the game around the characters in the adventuring party, you should be prepared to customize the game to suit the player's taste. The Know Your Players section in the introduction of the Dungeon Master's Guide provides some guidance for doing so, based on known players and archetypes. To help identify... I'm slipping you. To help identity... It didn't... I feel like that might just be... Yeah, that's just a typo. To help identify what types of players are in the group. You can ask each player any or all of the following questions. Yeah, hey, roll 20, or maybe if this is directly from Wizard Coast, you got a typo here. Which of the 3 pillars of adventuring, combat, exploration, role-playing, interest you the most? In the case of my character, my party, the main things that they enjoy is combat and role-playing, with a pretty even split down them. So I really focus a lot on the combat and role-playing, and then I kind of dumb down the exploration. I don't spend a ton of time on travel between locations, How much humor do you like in the game? I feel like this is an important one because I feel like I've played in games that were like, when the plot was presented to us, it sounded really serious, So everyone made these very serious characters, but then they just kept adding in all these super, super slapstick jokes and whatnot that just made me kind of just feel like we didn't quite fit. Like we were on this very, frankly, kind of dark quest, really. But every character we encountered was just like cartoon levels of goofy. And I'm just like, it just felt odd. So just tone, make sure everyone's on the same page with tone. What level of technology do you prefer, Frankly, that's one that I feel like that's just kind of very setting based, It's like, I feel like this can play into this. I feel like it's almost weird how often this conversation comes up of like guns in DnD. It's like in my current thing, nobody they've encountered has had a gun, but artificers are a thing. Artificer does not equal gun. Okay, like in my game, artificer does not equal gun. So, but also artificer is not technology. Like it's a very high fantasy setting that I'm in. Artificer fits perfectly well in it. So just don't look at that question and think that it's a question of like, should artificer be in it or not? Should gun be in it or not? Because it goes into other things, Do you enjoy solving in-game puzzles and riddles? And do you like to track experience points, or would you rather have your character advance and level when I tell you to? That last one is one of the most important ones, and also one of the easiest ones to answer. Especially if it's a group of experienced players, just ask them outright. Do you guys prefer XP or milestone for leveling up? And, that's like, it's just kind of a big thing with a lot of groups between which one they do. Most games I run, my groups prefer to do milestone, and so that's what we're doing currently is milestone system. When they reach the appropriate point in the story, they level up. Whereas other people might prefer, XP. They like to kind of grind out for those levels, and just kind of, feel themselves grow stronger as they fight stronger enemies and whatnot. So that I feel like that last one is one of the most important ones, but also one of the simplest ones to address, honestly. I believe this is the last section, house rules. House rules include optional rules such as those presented in Chapter 9 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and rules you create. If you plan to use any house rules, Session 0 is a good time to discuss those rules with the players and solicit their input. I do this a lot. Even after Session 0, I will poke my head in and be like, hey guys, I found this cool little homebrew. Is this a rule you guys be interested in playing around with, And, sometimes do, sometimes they don't. So, it's just something it's kind of a constant discussion, honestly. House rules are best presented as experiments, and time will tell if they're good for your game. If you introduce a house rule in Session 0 that turns out to have an adverse effect on people's enjoyment of the game, you may jettison or revise the house rules to create a better gaming experience for everyone. Don't feel bad if a house rule doesn't end up working as well as you expected it to. Remember, the goal is to ensure everyone is having fun. I find it's actually very nice that they actually end this section with that bit, is because that is, at the end of it, all this stuff is to help ensure everyone's enjoying themselves. And on the topic of house rules in particular, yes, that is very much the point of them. Like some very common ones, for example, might be, drinking potions. Is it an action? It's a bonus action. In my games, drinking potions is a bonus action, just period. In, say, my brother's games, though, he has drinking healing potions be a bonus action, but other potions are not. Additionally, there's sort of the can you feed other people's potions? What's that action economy? Another super common one is how to handle critical hits. Some people just do the standard, you double the dice rolled. Some people do like maximum damage possible plus some dice. Some people, there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of really common ways to do it, and there's so many ways you can find online. Some options are presented in the DM guide. Some options you can find across the internet. Some things you and your group just might come up with together that you just feel like works for you. This right here is just kind of a chance of you guys to really just tweak the game to work for you. And so that really, I believe that is the full section that it provides on, so the very next page is actually, brings us right into the sidekick section, which we actually covered last time. I believe actually, nope, I accidentally exited out that other bit. So let me just pop this back open here. Because there was one other thing I wanted to look at, because it mentioned... I don't see it here. The group patron thing. Oh yeah. Oh wait, it's right here. Oh yeah, that's a whole chapter on its own. Is group patrons. So that's a whole chapter on its own. We might save that for another time, actually, because this is actually something I've not really messed with much. Let me see how long it is. Okay, yeah, so it gives like a bunch of different examples on patrons and whatnot. But I guess to just kind of quick go over it, because this was something. So this is. Hello, it's not zooming. Just want to zoom. I think I broke it. I broke it. So this is one of the things that might actually help kind of play into starting up your game. So I guess to give a quick summary then, really, is so when you're setting up your game, you want to sit everyone down. You want to present to them the game you plan to present to them. What is its setting? What is its tone? And how are the characters going to be starting the game? Like, essentially, what is that first scene that's going to bring them together? From there, be it them meeting, say, their patron, or being brought together by a patron. Are they meeting for the first time? Are they all answering the same job request? Whatever that is, it is at that point you then sit down with them and start to make characters. Let them discuss what sort of characters they want to make. If they are not sure off the bat, maybe start letting them roll stats first. Let them figure out what classes everyone wants to play to make sure you have a good kind of cohesion of party composition. And then at that point, if you didn't discuss it already, let them start discussing, like, how do they know each other? Do they know each other? What relations within the party exist before the start of the game even? From there, they can also discuss with you, the DM, in secret, one-on-one, for any kind of secrets maybe their character has, or direct ties to other stuff that's going to be happening in the campaign. And then once all that is settled, you can discuss, like, kind of those hard and soft limits, things you don't want to do in the game. Or you might actually start with that before you even do the characters, to make sure the game is even, right for everyone playing. If anything, that's probably the way you want to do, is actually start with that, to make sure the game is actually something that everyone's looking for. The main reason I kind of flipped the order initially is because a lot of people I play with lately are people I've known for a long time, so we don't necessarily start with that because we kind of just get each other a bit, But especially if you don't, probably start with that bit to make sure everyone is good and comfortable. Once all that's discussed, once everybody is kind of good and has that locked in, at that point, the next thing to do is schedule that first game. Or maybe session 0 actually ends with just a little bit of character role play. Let them do that first little scene where they meet each other and start to get a feel for things. At that point, it really just kind of depends on you guys and your time frame. Sometimes a session 0 can be the length of an actual session. Maybe it's really short, just to kind of knock out some characters like super quick. Whatever session 0 is for you, it is important to have to make sure everybody understands what game's being played and how best to play the game together. So, believe that actually kind of brings us to an end of our little talk about Session 0. I hope it was good and informative for you. Just like the previous video, this VOD will go up on the YouTube page for ease of access if you want to look back on it. Or if you just want to read this up on yourself, it is available on Roll20 or D&D Beyond, or you can get a physical copy of the book. And if you don't want to get Tasha's Culture for Everything, you can find online any sort of resource about people talking about how they run their Session Zeros. Session 0 is something that is, just very community driven, and so it is something that you can very easily find some extra help on how to run it. Just pretty much anywhere you look for your D&D or even other RPG games, because Session 0 is not just for D&D. It is for Pathfinder, Lancer, Cyberpunk, whatever TTRPG you're playing. Session 0 is going to help you figure out what game everyone wants to play together. So it's a very important thing to do. But I do believe that will actually bring us to the end of our little talk here. It was great getting to talk with you guys again. Another little short stream, like I said, just about as long as the previous one, actually. I do like doing these just kind of little streams to kind of talk about stuff like this here and there. So we might try to keep doing some of that. And once again, be sure to join us at the end of June, 26th through the 30th, as us and other streamers take part in the VTuber SummerSlam as part of Gamers Outreach Big Fundraiser. Hope to see you then, if not before then. And for now, just thank you guys for watching, and I wish you all a good... Well, it's not night time, so wish you all a good day, and safe travels. Bye.